Hello and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those fascinating small moments, bold decisions and unexpected ripple that create waves of change in brands, businesses, leadership and in life. I'm Laura Barber, founder of The Ripple Impact, and after more than 20 years inside global giants like Coca-Cola and Boots, I now work with founders and leaders to turn human stories into brand growth. Each week, I sit down with what we call wave maker guests who've shaped companies and culture to explore the ripple moments that have changed their trajectory and the lessons you can take into your business. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Dan Brain, co-founder of MadFest, the marketing festival that has shook up the industry, known for beige conference halls and predictable panels. MadFest is one of the most disruptive marketing and advertising platforms out there. Alongside his co-founder, Dan has grown MadFest into the UK's biggest marketing festival, bringing together 15,000 brands and agencies and creating a space that feels far more like a cultural movement than a traditional event. Dan, welcome to the show. So great to have you here. We are both just coming off the back of MadFest North, so I'm so excited to talk to you about the stories behind the stories. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really excited for today. So at The Ripple Impact, we love to start at the beginning and get to know the person behind the business, behind the incredible accolades and what they've achieved, and get to know some of the big moments and the ripple moments that have really shaped their trajectory, what has led them to where they are today. What have been some of those ripple impact moments for you that has ultimately led to MadFest?
Yeah, so some of them, I guess, are fairly conventional and some of them perhaps a little less so. If I was to do it chronologically, I grew up in pretty much the arse end of nowhere in just outside Swansea in Wales. And, it's a lovely place to grow up, constantly on the beach, in the sea, all of that sort of stuff. But
No.
when I actually went to university in Brighton, it sort of opened my world to a whole list of new possibilities and opportunities. So I guess that was a really conventional but formative experience for me where, I started getting interested in media and, met a lot of my friends who I still, keep in touch with today.
Yeah. And events has run through your career a lot, hasn't it? It's been part of your journey. Like MadFest didn't start from nothing. It was something that was part of your career and roles that you'd had in the past. Did you always know that you wanted to go into events? Like, is that how it started? Let's rewind. Like, how did MadFest even come about?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things to talk about. So in university days, I was a terrible DJ and a probably slightly below average promoter as well. So I used to try and put on the odd night, not necessarily to any great effect, but in terms of enthusiasm for events, maybe that is where it first started building. And I always found myself sort of daydreaming and coming up with brand names and propositions and all of that sort of stuff without even realizing I was doing it. I thought I was just being sort of away with the fairies, but I suppose that's kind of where it came from. And a little while after leaving university, I sort of made a decision to move from Brighton to London and go and work for a company called EMAP, which you may remember. Lots of people, EMAP, East Midlands Associated Press, I think. Lots of people did a stint there. So they were the publisher in the noughties who had like the lads mags like FHM. They had Grazia and a bunch of sort of consumer titles as well as have I got news for you favorites like heating and ventilation news. So weirdly being a bit of a nerd and a sort of magazine geek, I always wanted to work for EMAP. So I was 24, just moved to London and was sort of like thrust into this world of media and producing events. And I guess I didn't really think very much of it at the time. It was I was young, I was in London, I was working for a publishing company. Lots of people do that sort of thing. But looking back, it was incredibly formative. So, the age of 24, you were essentially responsible for creating a product from scratch. So, that I think was a lot of responsibility at a young age. And I'm not sure many companies still do that. Obviously, there's
Yeah.
a slight sort of risk averse approach where you have multiple sign offs. We were just basically told to go and make a success of events, and you had about 12 different events to run a year. It was a little bit wild. Lots of amazing things came from it. It's where I met my wife. So, we've known each other like 20 years now. And there are lots of marriages from that time as well. It was, pre-apps. So it was essentially a big sort of dating agency.
That's cool.
Um, old school. But it's also where I met Ian, co-founder of MadFest, and a lot of people who work on the MadFest team today. Yeah, that's kind of where we all met nearly sort of 20 odd years ago. So yeah, a big moment in my career and trajectory, but didn't necessarily know it at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how you end up in a place that just feels like home and just feels right. And what you never really know until you're in that space and you look back like, oh, that was so formative and that really shaped it. And this opportunity. And it's funny how cumulatively that builds to where ultimately you're kind of meant to be. So take us
absolutely.
back
Yeah.
to the inception of MadFest, right? Was it from a frustration of boring festivals and events and conferences? Or like, tell us the story of how MadFest was created. What was the gem of the idea at the beginning?
Yeah, so I think there had always been a way of doing things in events, and I think you used the word beige in your intro, and that kind of like perfectly sums it up. The event industry, and I think it has changed for the
Mm,
better, but maybe MadFest were one of the first people to actually sort of push to try different things. But the event industry had a very rigid interpretation of what it wanted, particularly those sort of large scale events, those big exhibitions. So the idea was you keep the cost down, you would have
mm,
huge hall spaces, you would pile it high, sell it relatively cheap. Then you try and play off Google against Amazon to have some of those bigger stands. And it just sort of struck me that there was a bit of a disconnect between what event organizers want, which was these sort of huge sprawling trade shows, and what people in sort of creative spaces were saying to me. So marketing and advertising,
mm.
I don't think those style events necessarily reflect what creative or media people, how they like to come together, how they do business, the kind of content that they want to receive. So yeah, a couple of acquisitions happened. Ian, my co-founder, we decided to do the only logical thing, which was to quit our jobs and raid our piggy banks and think about doing something else. So yeah, MadFest, marketing, advertising, disruption. I think what I wanted to do was to not necessarily completely reinvent the wheel. I wanted to take some of the stuff that I'd seen work really, really well and apply it in different ways and tweak essentially.
Mm.
So yeah, it was a bit of a frustration of there isn't a single uniform way that everything must be. And I think, the event industry had sort of peddled that one a little bit too much. If I think back to how I was taught how to write copy, it was all meant to be very serious, very business driven, very benefit driven as well. So, you
Mm.
will maximize ROI, blah, 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 blah. And that's just not how people speak in the real world.
No.
So, the beautiful thing about setting up shop by yourself is that you have a completely blank canvas to develop whatever tone of voice that you want. And just trying to speak to people in a more human level has just been such a game changer for MadFest. That's really, really relevant, particularly in the early days, because we had about 30 grand and about 5 months to get a show away. It was completely insane. I probably wouldn't do it again, but it was literally coming up with the brand name, the commercial model, selling it, marketing it. And when you don't have huge amounts of money to throw into online ads or whatever it may be,
Mm.
when you're a small team, you're a bootstrap startup, all you've got is your distinctiveness. So sort of developing that tone of voice, that Larry brand, it really helped us to cut through in the early days.
Yeah. And it still feels like that now. It still has that bravery, it has that boldness, like, the colors, the fonts, the shapes, the tone, as you said, is so important. And that sets the expectations of what people are going to experience, right? And how it's going to feel. As you said, it's not necessarily a corporate situation where everyone's kind of shepherded and herded into different rooms. It sets the tone for what people can experience.
Yeah, and I think in those days you never would have got away with it in a big
No,
company, right? So
no.
we spent a huge amount of money, a disproportionate amount of money on production and the brand, and without that, I think it probably would have sort of faded into obscurity fairly quickly. But the
Yeah,
beauty of doing it yourself is that you can be sort of resolute and stubborn on that sort of stuff and say, look, if you want to cut through and do something really, really different, you kind of have to back it, and it may lose
yeah.
money for a year or two. But yeah, that was a real privilege and an eye opener.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. And I speak to so many founders and entrepreneurs and business owners, and they say exactly the same as if you looked at our business on paper in the first 2 years, like no one would think this was the right idea. No one would back this. Like, are
Batshit
we really
crazy.
gonna
Yeah.
do this? This is mad. Exactly, batshit crazy. Are we really gonna do this? But I think when you have a purpose and a drive and an ambition and a goal and the tenacity, you can do anything. And I love the fact that it was like 30 grand, 5 months. What are we going to do? Let's go.
Yeah.
Has
Yeah.
the tone and style changed over the years, or what you kind of scribble down in those first few years? Is that still at the core? Like, how has the tone and the style and the values evolved over time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And honestly, I don't think it has changed all that much. So we still try to be irreverent when a funny
Mm,
news story breaks. We'll piggyback off it. It's informal. It's a little bit playful. It's a little bit cheeky. And I think people have got used to it, right, over time, which is kind of cool. So we constantly have to adapt and sort of think about new ways that we can cut through. But in the early days, I'd be totally lying if it was universally loved. We used to get the odd LinkedIn message saying, "No, these guys at Madfest are doing something really different, really new, and really cool." And occasionally, you'd have people like Rory Sutherland, picking up on it, which was amazing. We got a few emails in as well saying this is just immature and ridiculous. So
you were like, exactly. This is why it's so good.
yeah, exactly. So, I think that's a lesson as well, really,
Yeah.
that you can't please everybody, and being distinctive in terms of what the proposition is, what the product
Mm,
is, how the content at the event is displayed, the partnerships that we did, which very much in the early days just made us look a little bit bigger than we were. All of those elements combine, and they're more than a sum of their parts. So you sort of bring them together, and it makes something that is hopefully reasonably coherent, but mad enough to get people interested and get people out of the office.
yeah. And how did you even start? So you said 30 grand, 5 months, first event. You had partners that were maybe bigger than where you were at that space. How did you even start? Like, what did it look like? Like, take us behind the scenes of those early years.
Yeah, so we were lucky to have two really great investors, Derek Jones and Justin Leben, who were mad enough to put seed money into Madfest and really get it off the ground. But I guess the origins of the brand and the proposition, I mean, taking everything that we knew, the frustrations, the feeling that the event or industry seemed to want to provide something that people didn't necessarily want. A lot of that was really great sort of feedback and insight that helped us to form the brand. So it came together really quickly. One day I was at Ian's house in Crouch End, armed with some Sharpies and a flip chart, and we spent the afternoon just sketching out some ideas of what Madfest could be in terms of the brand, in terms of the proposition. And most of the ideas were absolutely terrible and never saw the light of day. But we sort of focused in on this MAD concept. So the acronym is actually marketing, advertising, disruption. A lot of people think it's marketing and advertising. A lot of people think it's a reference to Mad Men. They're all kind of like fairly lovely connotations to have. I'm happy for people to interpret it in whatever way they'd like to. So yeah, so we sketched it, and we came up with this sort of like the double slash as well, which I think you still see in terms of its identity today. And we built it really on, I guess, a few different pillars. So we felt that a lot of event content had got a little bit boring. Lots of panels, people agreeing with each other. Here's another programmatic advertising panel, and we wanted to get out of the corporate comms department and get people to say something that was real and would
Yeah.
resonate. So we came up with a concept of 20-minute, very short, snappy sessions, where people aren't necessarily going to tell you the whole story, but they're going to make you think. And then we thought, actually, there's different things you can do. You don't necessarily have to create something that is completely new. You can twist existing formats and come up with something that's quite powerful. So we came up with this idea of invite only, but at scale. So most events, people rely on selling tickets, or there's a free exhibition. We've been to invite-only events, we've been to dinners, we've been to conferences. And the reason why people do those events is because they're getting FaceTime with, in our world, brands, because they're the ones who are buying stuff. So we thought, let's take a hit on making any money from tickets and drive a value of sponsorship, a couple of thousand people in year one. And, let's say 75, 80% of them are there to buy stuff. So immediately there was a point of differentiation. The thing that we just kind of did because we felt it was a good idea at the time and made us look a little bit bigger than we were. We called pretty much every brand that we knew. I think, who was it in year one? Maybe Diageo and Heineken, and said, "Look, do an activation at Madfest. Build a bar. Use some interesting technology to power an experience." So partnerships were, again, a really important tool just to cut through when people are, I guess, a little bit cynical about a new launch, and you don't necessarily have the resources, the budgets to spend a huge amount of money. It was an instinctive decision, but read Mark Ritson, he thinks partnerships are one of the most powerful marketing tactics. So it certainly worked for us in those early days, just in getting people to take notice of what we were doing.
Yeah. Amazing. And what was the pitch to the brands that you called in that first year? Like, how did you say to them, you need to be here because this is different and this is fantastic? Can you wind your brain back to what were you saying to them at the time?
Well, I guess, can we have a load of beer, please? That was fundamentally the question. But, a lot of these brands, they do a lot of experiential stuff, right? They are beautifully crafted global brands that are operating in very competitive markets. So I'm sure the pitch was along the lines of, look, there's a really great audience who might drink Heineken on a night out or something like that, and you're a brand that's known for innovation and creativity, and why not sort of show up at an industry event and make Heineken look a really attractive place for the best talent to work? So I think it was something like that anyway.
I love that. Bring the beer. Everyone will follow.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, isn't it? We sort of tend to focus on really, really rational stuff, but maybe if you're a Madfest attendee, just the idea of getting to hear some interesting content and meet some interesting people and getting a free can of Heineken is more than enough.
Yeah, it's a double, triple win. I think that's the thing, though, because you talked about it then, but I think that's the thing with these events is that it's the connection, it's the human connection and the conversation, the discussion and the debate. And I think even if it's someone on stage that you're not necessarily having a direct conversation with, it feels conversational because of the style and the content that they're bringing, and usually a very honest story as well. It's not all the polish and it's not all the show, but it's the real story behind the campaigns and the challenges and the issues and the doubters. And I think that's what's really nice, is that it feels like a really honest reflection of what a brand or a business or an agency is going through, and how they've come out the other side, and what they've done, and how they've partnered with agencies, and what they've achieved, and what's been really gnarly and what's been brilliant. And I think that's what's really nice, is that people want those human conversations. They want the honesty. They want the rawness. And I think that's what makes it really different. And that's certainly the experience that I had at Madfest.
Cool. I'm pleased to hear that we delivered on the. This was your first Madfest, I think, was it?
It was. Right? It was. Madfest North, so it's fantastic. Had to start with the northern version, coming from
absolutely.
the north. So,
good choice.
start with the northern one. they were. Yeah, for sure.
Nice, yeah. But I think just picking up on your point of about human connection and the risk of sounding like a middle-aged man who's going to go on an AI rant. It is for me a lot of the stuff you see around AI. A lot of it's positive, right? About
Mm,
sort of creativity, etc. But a lot of it is about efficiency and
yeah,
the idea that you can get rid of a load of people and you don't need a creative agency to do as much as you previously needed them to do. And I think the most exciting thing for myself as an event organizer, as a founder, is that it really attaches a premium to human experiences. So,
yeah,
the demand to actually get out and get beyond the world of automations and to connect with people in an emotional way, to actually feel stuff, doesn't necessarily make always huge rational sense. I'm sure you could get a lot of the things that a lot of the content, a lot of the insights, if you read everything or if you got AI to summarize it. But I think we as humans have a need to get out and to connect with people and to build our contacts and all of that sort of stuff.
yeah.
So I think it's actually weirdly sort of, anyone who's in the experience game is probably feeling fairly confident about the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it actually was going to be one of my questions because I couldn't agree more. Like my business that I've set up, and we're not even a year in, is about human storytelling because I couldn't agree with you more that this element of connection and bonding and conversation and debate and discussion is so powerful. And there's only so much you can read and content you can gather through systems, through online, through blogs, etc. The conversations you have with people about those topics and that content that you might have read or you might have seen is often where the real power comes, is in the debate and the so what's and the what do you think about
Hmm.
this and have you tried that and have you thought about this and oh, do you know so and so. You're not going to get that from AI. You're going to get that from fantastic conversations and discussions, whether that's through a panel conversation or whether that's through who you meet when you're getting your food at lunchtime or queuing for a coffee. These conversations are so, so powerful. And because we are human at the end of the day and we need
Yeah, yeah.
that connection. And I think these are why these spaces are so powerful.
Well, you can't put serendipity in a spreadsheet or a forecast. That's
Absolutely not. I
and we've had
absolutely
people
love that.
found businesses at Madfest waiting in queues for stuff.
Yeah,
It's incredible when those little moments happen. I think your point about storytelling is really interesting as well. We all know the cliches that people buy people,
yeah,
but isn't it really weird that we try to convince people on a sort of rational level as to why they should part with their cash or whatever it is that you're looking to get. So, for us, sort of crafting that Madfest
mm,
story and having that sort of tone of voice and that view on the world and not being very corporate, trying to connect with people on a human and an
yeah,
emotional level has been an absolute game changer. It's also really interesting that, you got, I think I was reading something in Forbes or something like that. One of the big trends in the US at the moment is for tech companies to hire a sort of chief storytelling officer. So, there you
there we
go.
go.
Maybe
There
we're
we
on to
go.
something.
For sure. Well, I hope so. And if I wasn't confident before, which I really, really am, that there's so much power in human storytelling. It's how we've evolutionary communicated, right? You go back to kind of the cave people times of people drawing on walls of what happened. It's a way of storytelling. It's in our DNA. It's baked into who we are as humans, and it's so powerful. And if I hadn't already been convinced, I did have the pleasure of meeting Rory Sullivan at Manifest North. And I got to speak to him very briefly about the business. And he was like, that's fantastic. The future is in human storytelling. And I was like, yes. It was a
Yeah.
personal, brilliant moment for me because, I mean, if Rory Sullivan says it's right, then I'm going to take that and I'm going
He
to
would
run
probably
with it.
say something like the opposite of a good idea is another good idea, right? So
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
win with using AI and all of that sort of stuff, but I think for mere mortals such as ourselves, the absolute opposite throws up a few interesting possibilities.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So you talked about partnerships and working with brands and businesses, and obviously the presenters, the speakers, the panelists are such a
Yeah.
pivotal, central part of Madfest. How do you decide the speakers that get on the stage beyond the job titles and who they happen to work with? Of course, you're going to get the headliners of who work in these fantastic companies, but what do you really look for in speakers, and what is it the kind of style and tone that you want to bring to the
Yeah.
Madfest stage?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, there's such a need for curation, right? I think, as I touched on earlier, you can watch a million YouTube videos, you can read a bunch of articles, a bunch of business books, but it's a really laborious process. I think people look to events to really sort of distill what's current, what's happening next, to sort of shoot problems, etc. So the old way of doing things, and if I think back to those beautiful formative years at EMAP, there were strict rules on how you did stuff. So you jumped on the phone for a couple of weeks. You did 25 in-depth research calls. Maybe for a bigger event, you did 100, something like that. So we're constantly talking to the industry through sort of, our personal relationships, through events we go to, through stuff we read and things we find exciting. So we have a really small content team, Elaine, Alison, Luke, and part of myself. And we're always sort of like bouncing around ideas, thinking, oh, is this an interesting angle? Is this a really good theme for the event? I think it's sort of like maybe goes back to the point of, data and Henry Ford. If I ask people what they wanted, they would say a faster horse, right?
Yeah.
So kind of just are going to be serving up the same stuff as everybody else if you fall into that trap. So a little bit of gut feeling, a little bit of intuition, and actually just trusting the team as sort of editorial experts to come up with something that is different in terms of the format, different in terms of people actually saying something and not doing something really boring and corporate, and knowing who those people are. So it's I guess a combination of your networks, having the gumption to get onto LinkedIn and say that was really interesting, when a news story breaks, thinking that would fit really, really well with this themes. So it's not really based on any data. It's a bunch of editorial and creative people who just really want to do things in the MadFest way.
I love that you describe it as the MadFest way, because it definitely feels like it has its own style and uniqueness and personality. So that's great. Have you?
Absolutely.
It's probably a really tough question, but have you got some favorite moments from over the years? Something that stands out in your mind?
It's a really, really good question. So the first show, which was, I guess, November 2018, stood on stage and actually thinking, oh shit, this is actually a real thing now, because
It's
as anyone who's ever run an event knows, when the first iteration of it, it's all hypothetical, right? So trust me, it's going to be great. And Ian, who I've mentioned, my co-founder, like, we are absolute chalk and cheese. He's a brilliant commercial leader, completely sort of resilient, and to actually go out there and sell a concept with no photos, no video, no experience, no data, and get people enthused by it. I think it's actually really creative what he did there to get people behind the concept and bought in on year one. So I think that was a real moment as well. I guess this might be a ripple moment. COVID was a interesting
I had
experience.
that as a whole topic to ask you, and I was like, do we even want to talk about COVID? I don't know.
Do you know what? I would like to, because
Go
it's one
for
of
it.
those weird experiences that, in a business sense, ended up working quite well for us. So if I sort of like cast my mind back to when was spring 2020, that was sort of going into year 3 of MadFest. It was going to be our big breakthrough year. Some of the big tech companies had showed an interest in what we were doing, and then COVID hit and obviously threw everything, the world, into chaos. But obviously running an event was not going to happen that year. And at one point, I think Ian and we had about £6,000 in the bank account and a bunch of bills, which was concerning, to say the least. But I think what we did at that time is, I guess, the real advantage of a startup, of the agile startup. We didn't, like some of the big event organizers, have huge amounts of cash reserves that we could just see out, a load of staff that we could just put on furlough. It was kind of ourselves and one or two other people. So we had to react to that, and we had to adapt. So we sort of threw ourselves into virtual events and trying to do them in a MadFest way. We did this completely bonkers thing where we, over a week, we got, I think, 300 odd people to speak for 99 seconds and hooted them off afterwards. We did cribs with Rory Sutherland from his house in Kent, showing us, the technology he has in his toilet, all of that sort of stuff. So, people were serving up webinars. We thought, well, let's take what we do best, which is building something distinctive and different, and actually find a way of paying the bills and staying relevant in that period. So when we started running those, getting into the studio and running virtual events that felt a little bit different, it gave us confidence that we were going to get through that period. And two amazing things came out of it. So the first, because we were filming and editing and distributing and monetizing all of that content online, and had built a relationship with Rory Sutherland, that's where the Mad Masters course came from. It was a feeling that actually you can build hybrid experiences across sort of events, on-demand content, live sessions, all of that sort of stuff. And there's a market for it as well. So it was a really interesting online extension of a business and one of our sort of like key products today. So that was one thing. And then the other slightly bonkers thing we did, because we were small and didn't have, lots of shareholders and were able to take a risk. We were, I think, the first show, certainly in our industry, be the first, event to come back after COVID. So we moved MadFest from November to July 2021. So obviously in November, the event would have been inside. That wasn't going to happen. It was that really weird time when Boris Johnson said, we're going to completely relax the rules. Then he got a little bit nervous and said, we might see them out a little bit more. But we found a way of running MadFest instead of in a conventional venue, but in a couple of car parks outdoors. It was a one and only year I think we've ever done a brand partnership with Dettol, which was felt right at the time. But that was a real game changer, because some competitors had ceased to exist, kind of sadly.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were very, very nervous and slow about coming back. So, what followed from taking that real gamble, it was a big gamble for us, had we not been able to run that show, was 2 years of triple digit growth. So MadFest literally that time was the only gig in town.
Yeah.
So people really switched onto it, and it just, gave us a huge advantage. And I think it was a real pivotal moment in terms of what you see today.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And that ability to pivot and adapt and create new moments, as you said, do something still very disruptive in a world of webinars and pub quizzes, and like everyone got so fatigued with the whole online world through COVID that I'm sure people are absolutely desperate to get back in person and have conversations and not just be looking at a screen all the time. And one day we are going to be doing this podcast in the studio. It's going to happen. We'll repeat this conversation.
Do you remember House Party and things like that? There were all these sort of things that were a thing, weren't they, around then? So
they were a thing. But I think what was really interesting is that, as you said, it forced people to be really inventive, and the necessity being the mother of an invention and innovation and all that kind of good stuff, is that it forced people to do things really differently, and actually in there created a whole new wave of opportunities and ideas and things that either were right at the time and you kind of quickly dropped, or actually things that still stayed fundamentally as part of your business because they kind of just worked, and you could try new things out. And as you said, you didn't have the big shoulders, you didn't have a big corporate board team saying, no, you can't do that, hang on, let's go through this list of. You could be really inventive and really fast and really adaptive, which can be really, really exciting despite the risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you think back to that time and all this sort of slightly over the top news coverage of, is this the end of events as we know it? Everything's going to be virtual going forward. And I always think with any sort of big disruption, be it a global crisis like COVID, or an emerging technology like AI, you don't always necessarily see what you expect to see. So the pendulum very much firmly swung back in favor of, do you know what, we really like human experiences. We don't necessarily love sitting at screens, even though it's a really wonderful, efficient thing to do and quite enjoying it at the moment. But do as a human being like to get out and to meet people and to build relationships. You hear these ideas of return on the experience and
Mm-hmm.
mobile events thriving at Festa, taking some of that as well. So yeah, it's really interesting as when you have a big disruption, is to have that little bit of balance and to say, look, is it really just going to go in that one direction, or is it going to go off in tangents, or is that pendulum going to swing back? And
Yeah.
normally what happens is that the hype is a little bit by its nature overstated, and then you develop something which is a bit more nuanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've talked some of the big disruptive things that are going on in the world of marketing advertising. Is there anything that you see bubbling under the surface that you think this is coming or people are talking about? What are you hearing in the world of disruption that you think might come in the next few months and years?
Yeah, so our theme for MadFest this year is the human touch. It's really resonated with people. The last couple of years of events, maybe going back a little bit further, everything has been about AI and, can
Well,
AI replace your creative agency, and can you get rid of a bunch of people if you use AI? And it feels like that pendulum has swung back into a
yeah.
more sort of nuanced kind of position. I think everybody is no great surprises. Everybody is enthusiastic about the possibility of combining those new technologies with very, very human things like
Mm.
creativity, with instinct, with intuition. That feels like the kind of like the flavor of a debate right
Mm.
now. Sometimes topics sort of come and go, and they're sort of more popular at certain times than others. I really think that neurodiversity is probably due a big comeback. I mentioned earlier that in terms of our own business story, Ian and I, chalk and cheese, I'm scatty and disorganized and focused on brands and stories and emotional intelligence and feelings, and get sort of like a little bit OTT on that side of things. Ian is the opposite, thick-skinned salesperson who doesn't take no for an answer. And just as founders, having that sort of chemistry
Mm.
um, really, really works. So when you're thinking about sort of building teams, and I think it's complete madness to build a team of people who are just all like
Yeah.
each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So whether it's ADHD or autism or any kind of just outlook on how you see the world, thinking about ways that teams can combine and leverage and use all of those, I know people call them superpowers and whatnot, but leverage those things into something that's really, really powerful. I could see that absolutely making a comeback.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
completely agree. My friend calls it neurospicy, and I love that.
Neurospicy. Yeah.
And I love that. I think it's so true. And as you said, and I'm really jealous of yours and Ian's kind of relationship and kind of complementary styles, because I'm a solo founder and it's just me, myself, and I.
It's
And my
tough,
style
isn't it?
very it
Yeah.
is tough, and my
Yeah.
style very much aligns with yours, so I need an Ian in my camp to come on board and keep me on the straight and narrow and keep me on the commercial lens and all that kind of good stuff. But you're right, it's like there's so much complementary and powerful things that can come out when you bring that diversity together in whatever way and shape and form that looks like. But to bring that diversity of thought and to have the sounding board and to have people to challenge you and to take you somewhere much further, much deeper, much more powerful is really powerful. So
Yeah,
so
I would
I love
recommend
that.
it. Just don't give them too much equity. No, not speaking from experience. Ian and I had the same amount of equity. Yeah, I mean, when you take in those sort of big moments, how do you get through COVID, times of crisis? You need people around you who bring things to the party that you're not necessarily
Yeah.
the best person to advise on. I mean, I would be absolutely useless when it comes to event operations. I don't know how I ended up working in events, but the third person we should mention in the story really is a guy called Matt Hudson, sort of division of labor. It's been I come up with a product and the brands and the model. Ian is the person who goes out and gets people enthused and sells it. And Matt is the poor bugger who has to deliver all this stuff and bring it to life. So he couldn't do what I do, and I couldn't do what he does. So you
Oh,
add us as a trio, and you've kind of got all bases covered. So yeah, I can totally recommend getting a business partner, sharing the burden, all of the boring things that have to be done as well, those tax returns and VAT, all of that sort of stuff. And obviously having a good board around you as well. So, when times get tough and you do naturally experience some challenges or crises, then knowing that you've got experienced people who've seen it all before, I think is a really useful thing to have.
Yeah, amazing. The world of marketing seems to change so quickly and at pace, and often directly as the world changes. Marketing always seems like the space that changes so quickly and has to almost immediately when the world changes. What advice would you give to marketeers that they're in that space of change and dynamism, and the pace of change is just so high at the moment in particular, and the world is absolutely bonkers? What advice would you give to marketeers right now?
I'm afraid I'm going to sound a little bit like Rory Sutherland here. So everything changes, but nothing changes, right? It's really, really true when people say, why focus on the things that are changing? Why not focus on the things that don't appear to change? So, if we were, for example, to develop a course on AI marketing, lots of people have done it, but literally the content would change so quickly.
Yeah.
If you were to develop a course on the things that don't change and how to be resilient and how you can leverage human behavior in the face of AI, then that's probably got a little bit more shelf life. So as I said, everything changes, but nothing changes. I think it's really easy to get swept away with the latest shiny new thing, or where the world may or may not be going. Remember NFTs, all of that sort of stuff, some of it happens and some of it doesn't happen and some of it comes back, like QR codes, for example. So I would really look at what doesn't change. So we've talked about human experiences, the need to communicate with people on a human level, our natural curiosity, our natural will to socialize is, we're a social species. This isn't new. And we fundamentally have all of this kind of hardwired into our DNA. So I think if you can say, look, okay, well, there are these things changing. It's really good to keep an eye on that. Don't get swept away with hyperbole, but also think, okay, what doesn't change? And I think if you have got one eye on what's new and next, and one eye remaining consistent and true, and not forgetting that we're very much in a people-based industry, I think that's probably how I would approach things.
We always ask our guests, who we call wave makers because they're making waves on the industry, the same question as we close out the episode. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers?
Okay. You don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. I think we can get completely obsessed with a focus on something that's completely unique and different. So look at what is out there, look at what works, look at what doesn't work. Think about what can you do to put your own unique stamp on things, to elevate the brands, to make the proposition stronger. I would say, Laura, I feel your pain in terms of doing things solo. I think, having a good partner and having a really good team in place where you can bring different things to the table, where you can steer your business through challenges, I think that's really, really important. Get out there, speak to people, build relationships. All of the talk about, AI, I think it's still very much an industry that's about connections, about relationships. People buy based on relationships and trust and brand equity as well. I think in terms of B2B, certainly in terms of what we did, huge opportunities there to build distinctive brands, which I think MadFest would fall into the category of. It amazes me that everything can feel so samey, and actually through the language you use, through your branding, through the way that you talk to people, I think there's a massive opportunity there for founders to stand out from the crowd when they can't necessarily throw huge amounts of marketing budget into it. And then finally, I would say just do it, to quote Nike. So yeah, I mean, it is a hugely rewarding experience. You will find new energy. There'll never be a right time to do it. It is genuinely amazing when you feel such passion and you have so much on the line.
Yeah.
Like there are good times, there are bad times. Maybe it's not for everyone, but if you're curious about the world, if you want to do things differently, I think it will give you new energy and put a spring in your step if you decide to go solo and do things yourself.
Amazing. Such fantastic advice. Dan Brain, thank you so much for taking us behind the scenes of MadFest, the story. And it's a reminder that big waves often begin with frustration in the industry, beige conferences, and a real need to do something different and to disrupt and to build a human connection in a way that is just so powerful and just so inspiring.
I've loved it. Don't often reflect on the story about what happened. No, we're not. How many years in are we now? We're 8 years in. So not a million miles off 10 years of MadFest. So it's really nice to go on a trip down memory lane and sort of share a few thoughts about how it all came together. We all learn through experiences. So I think podcasts like yourselves to hear people who are doing interesting things, who have unique specialisms, it's all part of a sort of rich tapestry of life, and we can learn and apply those things in different ways. So really appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you. It's been such a wonderful conversation to get to know you behind the business a lot more, and to shed a light on MadFest, the disruptive things that you're doing, the boldness that you have, the values, the personality, the style, the tone, the gumption, the bootstrap startup to what is now such an incredible platform for marketing, advertising, and disruptive tech. So thank you, and I'm excited for the next one. So thank you so much.
To London and have one of those.
Absolutely, I'm going to be there. I will see you there. For everyone listening and YouTube watching, remember that the industry only shifts when someone decides to not accept the way things are done and to change it up and do it their way. If you are looking to elevate the human storytelling of your brand, please get in touch with us at the Ripple Impact so we can see how we can help your business grow. Please check out MadFest for this year. Get your tickets now. It's one not to be missed. That is a wrap on this Ripple episode. Tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring wavemaker guests. We will see you all next week. I'm Laura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact. Thank you so much, Dan.
See you at MadFest. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.